The town I grew up in was the kind of place you could drive through in 5 minutes without realizing you'd passed it. A single main road cut through the middle, with a few side streets sprouting off like weak branches. There was a diner with a flickering neon sign, a grocery store whose paint had peeled to gray, and a post office that doubled as a meeting place when people wanted to talk without really saying anything. It was small, tired, and ordinary, except for the well. It sat at the edge of town, just where the cracked pavement gave way to gravel and weeds. The lot that held it was overgrown, the wire fence around it bent and sagging. The well itself was older than anything else here. Older than the church, older than the diner, older even than the row of houses that slouched along Main Street. The stones were rough and uneven, stacked without polish, blackened by moss and rain. A wooden cover had been set over the opening long ago, but time had warped it. One corner sagged, leaving a gap big enough to see the dark throat of the well beneath. Nobody went near it. As kids, we made a game of daring each other to run across the lot and touch the stones, but even the bravest never got close. It wasn't the same kind of thrill as sneaking into the mill or breaking into the empty houses. The well wasn't fun. It wasn't the kind of fear that made you laugh afterward. It was heavier than that, like standing too close to a cliff edge and knowing one wrong step could send you down. The story we were told was simple. If you looked into the water, you wouldn't see your own reflection. You wouldn't see the sky above or the weeds crowding around the rim. You'd see a face, the face of the last person in town to die. When I was little, that was enough to keep me from sleeping. I'd lie awake, picturing strangers' pale eyes staring back at me from the dark, unblinking. The older kids swore it was true. They said if you watched long enough, you could even see the face change when someone new died. But none of them ever claimed to have looked themselves. Even kids who lied about everything else never dared lie about that. By the time I was old enough to know better, I dismissed it the way I dismissed most of the stories that clung to this place. Ghost lights in the woods, a woman in white seen walking the back roads. Every small town had its folklore. The well was just ours. Still, I noticed things. How grown-ups would walk on the opposite side of the street whenever they passed it, never glancing at the lot. How conversations always faltered when death came up, voices dropping, eyes sliding away. And how no one, not even drunks or daredevils, ever lifted that cover. I left at 18, certain I'd never come back. But life has a way of circling in on itself. A job lost, a relationship ended, money gone faster than it came. I packed what I had into the back of my car and drove the same roads I'd once sworn off forever, back to my mother's house. Back to the same streets, the same diner, the same shadows hanging over the same lot. The well hadn't changed. The day I first walked past it again, the air was thick with humidity. Clouds pressed low over the rooftops and the weeds around the stones dripped with leftover rain. The wooden cover looked worse than I remembered, splintered, warped, sinking into the rim. For a moment, I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, staring at it like you stare at something you recognize but wish you didn't. My chest tightened. I turned quickly and kept walking. After that, I couldn't help noticing it more. Each time I passed, my steps slowed. My eyes caught on the sagging fence, the crooked wood, the black shadow of the gap where the cover didn't sit flush. The lot seemed darker than the rest of the street, even on sunny days. One evening, I made the mistake of mentioning it at the diner. The men at the counter were the same ones who had always been there, their faces older but their habits unchanged. They sat with mugs steaming in front of them, talking in low voices about crops and weather. The waitress filled their cups with a practiced hand. I asked, half joking, "Anybody know if that old well's dried up yet?" The silence was immediate. Spoons stopped clinking. One man cleared his throat loud enough to cover the gap. The others kept their eyes on their cups. "Best to leave it," one muttered. That was all. The conversation turned sharply back to weather, and no one looked at me again. I finished my coffee in silence, heat crawling up my neck. After that, I stopped bringing it up, but the curiosity only grew worse. I caught myself lingering near the lot at dusk, staring at the warped cover until the shadows blurred. From my bedroom window, I found myself gazing down the street, tracing the dark outline of the lot even when I couldn't see the well itself. The silence of the town made it worse. Nobody mentioned it, nobody joked about it, nobody admitted it existed at all. That silence was heavier than the stories had ever been. One night, the air damp with mist, I stopped at the edge of the lot and stood there. The grass was tall, bending under its own weight. The fence leaned forward as if tired of holding itself up. My hands itched, my chest was tight. It would be easy, I thought. Just a glance. I crossed the lot, weeds brushing against my legs, and laid my hand on the warped cover. The wood felt soft in places, splintered in others. Slowly, I pushed it aside. The smell of damp stone rose up immediately, heavy and old. I leaned over, my palms pressed against the cold rim, and stared down. The water was far below, black and still. My breath fogged in the air as I leaned closer. For a long moment, nothing happened. The surface remained dark, swallowing the faint glow of the streetlight above. I watched until my eyes watered, until my chest ached with the breath I was holding. Then I pulled back quickly, shoving the cover into place with a sharp scrape. The silence pressed in heavier than before. I walked home fast, every step loud in the stillness. Mrs. Holloway died a week later. Her real name was Ruth Holloway, but everyone in town just called her Miss Ruth. She'd lived down the street from us since before I was born. She was always outside in her garden, bent over rows of flowers with her wide straw hat, or sitting on her porch shelling peas in the evenings. When I was a kid riding my bike past, she'd wave, sometimes calling out a reminder to keep to the sidewalk. Young man, as if I were still 8 years old, even when I'd grown taller than her fence. She was 90, maybe older. Nobody was surprised when the news came. She passed quietly in her sleep. The obituary in the paper was 2 short paragraphs, but everyone in town already knew before the ink dried. I stood on the sidewalk outside the church the morning of her funeral. The air was sharp with cold. My hands jammed in my jacket pockets as I watched people file in. Coats buttoned tight, black dresses, heads bowed. The church bell tolled, its sound carrying down Main Street, echoing against the tired buildings. I thought about going inside, but I stayed where I was, leaning against the fence post, watching, and all I could think about was the well. The thought nagged at me all through the service. I left before it ended, walking home down the empty street. My steps slowed as I passed the lot. The crooked cover sat exactly as before, warped and sagging, weeds curling high around the stones. My chest tightened. My legs felt heavy, like the air had thickened around me. I stopped at the edge of the lot and stared. The story rose in my mind, clear as if someone were whispering it into my ear. You wouldn't see yourself. You'd see the last person who died. I should have kept walking. I knew better. But the pull was too strong. The grass hissed as I pushed through it, the damp smell of soil rising around me. The stones loomed dark and slick with moss. My hand shook as I pressed it to the cover. The wood was soft in places, splintered in others. Slowly I shoved it aside. The scrape of wood against stone seemed too loud in the still air. I leaned over. The smell of wet stone and earth curled up to meet me, heavy and cold. The water sat far below, black and still, like glass stretched tight. I held my breath, every muscle tense. At first I saw only darkness. The surface swallowed the faint glow of the street lamp behind me. My own shadow bent over the rim, but there was no reflection of my face. Then the water rippled, and her face rose into focus. Mrs. Holloway stared up at me from the depths, her features pale and slack. Her eyes were cloudy, wide open, her mouth sagging as though she had tried to speak but couldn't. The water warped her face slightly, but there was no mistaking her. The same woman I'd seen bent over her garden for years, now staring lifelessly through the water. A jolt ran through me so hard I nearly lost my balance. My stomach heaved. I staggered back, catching myself on the stones, my breath tearing from my throat in ragged gasps. Her face didn't vanish when I pulled back. It remained, staring, as though pinned beneath the surface. My hand shot out, shoving the cover back over the opening with a loud scrape. The sound echoed in the lot, sharp and final. I stumbled into the weeds, heart pounding, and didn't stop moving until I was halfway down the street. When I finally looked back, the lot was dark, silent, as though nothing had happened. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her pale face floating in the water. Clouded eyes, open mouth, lifeless but watching all the same. By morning, I tried to convince myself it had been a trick. My brain had filled in what it expected to see. I'd been thinking about her all day, standing outside the church, hearing the bell toll. My mind had projected her face into the water, that was all. But deep down, I knew it hadn't been imagination. I went to the diner, half hoping to hear someone mention it, half hoping to prove to myself I was being ridiculous. The regulars sat at the counter in their usual spots, their voices low, the clink of spoons in mugs filling the silence. I slid onto a stool, ordered coffee, and forced myself to speak. "Strange about Miss Ruth, huh?" The air shifted. The waitress's hand hesitated with the pot. One of the men at the counter stirred his coffee too hard, the spoon rattling against the mug. Nobody looked at me. "She was old," one of them said finally. His tone was clipped, final, the kind of voice that ended a conversation. I hesitated, then pushed further. "Ever hear those old stories about the well?" The silence thickened. The waitress set my cup down harder than she needed to, the coffee sloshing over the rim. She didn't meet my eyes. "Don't go near it," one of the men muttered. Nobody else spoke. I sipped my coffee with shaking hands, the bitterness burning my tongue. The silence pressed down on me until I couldn't stand it. I left the diner with the weight of their eyes, or maybe the deliberate absence of them, following me out. That evening I tried again at home. My mother sat in her chair, the glow of the television flickering across her face. During a commercial break, I asked, "Do you remember what people used to say about the well?" Her hands tightened on the armrest. She didn't look at me. "That's old nonsense. People said you could see the dead in it." Her head snapped toward me, her eyes sharp in a way that made my chest tighten. "Don't talk about it. Don't go near it." Her voice was flat, cold, final, the kind of tone that left no room for argument. She turned back to the television, turning the volume up. I sat there in silence, my hands damp, the flicker of the screen painting the room in pale light. When I finally lay down that night, I stared at the ceiling until dawn. The face wouldn't leave me. 2 weeks later, the second death came. His name was Gary Bishop, but everyone called him Bish. I remembered him from when I was younger, always at the bar, always the loudest man in the room. He'd tell stories with his drink sloshing in hand, laughter booming, the kind of laugh that made your chest ache if you sat too close. He was the sort of man you couldn't ignore, even when you wanted to. The way he died spread through town faster than the paper could print it. Some said he'd fallen asleep drunk with a cigarette burning. Others swore it was a candle knocked over. Either way, the fire gutted his small house, leaving only blackened timbers and the acrid stink of smoke that clung to Main Street long after. By the time the neighbors noticed, Bish hadn't stood a chance. The funeral was held in the same church where Mrs. Holloway's had been. I stood outside again across the street, watching as the crowd shuffled inside. The air smelled faintly of smoke still, carried down from the ruins of his house. People shook their heads, whispered about tragedy, but no one said much more. Their faces were tight, guarded. As I stood there, my thoughts slipped where I didn't want them to go. The well. I told myself I wouldn't. I'd already seen more than I ever should have. One glimpse of Miss Ruth's pale face in that black water was more than enough for a lifetime. But the thought lodged itself in my head and didn't leave. If the stories were true, if what I saw wasn't just a trick of my mind, then Bish would be there now. His face would have replaced hers. The idea left me restless, pacing the house at night, staring out the windows at the dark street. My mother noticed me wandering but didn't say anything. She just watched me out of the corner of her eye, lips pressed tight, as though speaking the words out loud might make them worse. 3 nights after the funeral, I couldn't hold it back anymore. The streets were slick from an earlier rain, the pavement shining under the weak glow of the lamps. My footsteps echoed too loud as I walked, each one sharp against the silence. The lot appeared at the end of the street, darker than everything around it, weeds bent heavy with water. I crossed the grass quickly, heart hammering in my chest. The stones were slick under my hands as I gripped the rim, my fingers trembling as I pushed the warped cover aside. The scrape of wood against stone rang out in the night. The smell rose up again, damp earth and rot. I leaned over slowly, my breath catching in my throat, and looked down. The water gleamed faintly, black and still. For a moment, nothing stirred. My stomach turned cold with the thought that maybe it would be empty this time, that maybe I'd made it all up. Then the surface rippled. Bish's face floated into view. His features were pale, bloated, his eyes open but cloudy, lips cracked and blue. His mouth sagged open, his head tilting slightly to the side as if the water itself couldn't quite support him. The sight was unmistakable, no matter how the surface warped him. I jerked back, stumbling into the grass. My stomach heaved. I doubled over, gagging, bile burning my throat though nothing came up. My heart hammered so loud I swore it echoed off the stones. When I forced myself to look again, the face was still there, waiting. My hand shook as I shoved the cover back into place, the sound scraping through the night like a warning. I stumbled out of the lot and back down the street, my legs weak beneath me. 2 deaths, 2 faces, both exactly as the stories said. There was no denying it now. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Bish's face drifting in the black water, mouth slack, eyes cloudy. By morning, the looks had begun. At the diner, the regulars turned their backs when I came in. At the store, people shifted away from me, their words cut short when I passed. Even my mother avoided my eyes at breakfast, her hands trembling faintly as she set down her coffee cup. It wasn't just that Bish was gone, it was that I had gone looking. Somehow they knew. I tried to tell myself it was paranoia, but then I overheard the whispers. At the post office, 2 men leaned against the bulletin board, their voices low. "He's been out there. More than once. You saw him?" "I saw him." The words dropped like stones into the pit of my stomach. When they noticed me, they fell silent immediately, their eyes sliding away. They left without another word, but the damage was already done. That night, I stood at my window again, staring down the street. The lot was hidden in shadow, but I saw it clearly in my mind. The warped cover, the dark stones, the water waiting below. Bish's pale face floating there, replacing Ruth's. I told myself I wouldn't go back, but I knew I would. The change in how people treated me didn't come all at once. It was slow at first, the kind of shift you might miss if you weren't paying attention. But I was paying attention to everything now, and it grew harder to ignore each day. At the grocery store, the cashier used to greet me with a smile, asking after my mother or chatting about recipes. Now she barely said 2 words, her eyes fixed on the register, her hand pulling back quickly when she passed me my change. At the diner, the waitress's smile didn't reach her eyes, and when she poured my coffee, the cup rattled against the saucer as if her hands weren't steady. On the sidewalk, people stepped aside before I reached them. They kept their eyes on the ground, muttering greetings too faint to be real words. Some didn't speak at all. And when I glanced over my shoulder, I caught the quick dart of their eyes as they turned to watch me walk away. It wasn't subtle anymore. It was deliberate. I tried to ignore it, but the silence pressed harder every day. Then I overheard it, the word that made my stomach turn cold. I was at the post office, waiting to buy stamps. Two men stood near the bulletin board, talking in voices too low for anyone else to catch. But I was close enough, been seen out there more than once. You're sure? I saw him, standing right by it. There was a pause. The second man's voice dropped even lower, but the word carried clear enough. Harbinger. The first man didn't answer. Neither did I. I stood frozen until the clerk called them forward, and both turned to look at me. Not long looks, not accusing, but quick glances sharp enough to cut. Then they moved on, leaving the word echoing in my head. That night, I couldn't sit still. I paced from window to window in the house, pulling the curtains aside to stare at the empty street. The lot wasn't visible from here, but I felt it pressing against me from the dark anyway. My skin crawled with the sensation of eyes on me, even though the street was deserted. I stepped out onto the porch, lit a cigarette, and leaned against the railing. The ember glowed in the dark, the smoke curling thin in the cold air. The silence pressed against my ears until I found myself straining to hear something, anything. A figure appeared down the street, moving slowly along the sidewalk. An older woman, her coat pulled tight around her shoulders, her steps steady. She stopped at the edge of my yard and looked at me. Her face was pale, her eyes sharp in the glow of the streetlight. Her voice was thin, but I heard it clear. You keep looking and it'll look back. My mouth opened, but no words came. She turned and kept walking, her figure swallowed by the dark. I stayed on the porch long after she was gone, the ember of my cigarette burning down to ash. The next day at the diner, the silence was worse. The regulars didn't just stop talking when I walked in. They turned their shoulders, their backs angled toward me. I sat down anyway, but the weight of it pressed hard. The waitress poured my coffee without a word, her hand trembling so much that she spilled some onto the counter. She didn't clean it up. At the hardware store, the owner rang me up quickly, his eyes fixed on the register. His hands shook as he counted out change, and he pushed the coins across the counter without letting our fingers touch. Everywhere I went, people stared just a second too long before turning away. Some whispered behind their hands. A mother pulled her child closer when I passed. That night, I walked past the lot again. I told myself I wouldn't, but my feet carried me anyway. The weeds brushed against my shoes, damp from the evening dew. The cover sat crooked, warped wood sagging into the stones. I didn't push it aside. I stood there on the sidewalk staring, my chest tight, waiting for something to move. The silence hung heavy. The air smelled of wet grass and earth. My heart pounded so loud I thought I could hear it echo off the stones. Then came the sound of footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, each one measured against the silence. I froze. My hands clenched at my sides. The steps grew closer, stopping just behind me. My throat closed, every nerve screaming for me to turn, but I couldn't move. The silence stretched. Then the air shifted, cool against the back of my neck. I spun around. The street was empty. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, pressing against me until I shoved my hands into my pockets and walked fast back home, my steps loud and unsteady. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sense of being watched didn't fade when I shut the curtains. It didn't fade when I buried myself under the blankets. It followed me into the silence of the house, pressing close, unrelenting. By the next morning, I didn't bother denying it anymore. The days began to blur, stretched thin by sleepless nights and restless mornings. I went through the motions of work, of errands, of everything that used to anchor me to normalcy, but it all felt hollow. Every thought circled back to the lot, to the cover, to the dark stone ring hiding beneath the weeds. I told myself I wouldn't go back, that I had nothing to gain by standing over it again. But by nightfall, my steps always carried me there. It was as if the streets bent toward it, no matter which direction I started from. On the third night in a row, I found myself standing on the cracked sidewalk, my breath misting faintly in the cool air. The weeds clung to my shoes, damp and heavy, as I reached down and pulled the warped wood cover aside. The scrape of it against stone set my teeth on edge. The opening gaped before me, blackness, deep and unbroken, drinking in the faint glow from the streetlight. I leaned closer, peering down. The stone walls glistened faintly, streaked with damp. Far below, the darkness thickened into something nearly tangible. I waited, breath caught in my throat, for a ripple, a glimmer, some sign of water. Nothing. The silence was so deep it felt like sound itself had been swallowed. Then I saw it, not a reflection, not my own face bent above the circle, a pale oval surface from the dark, distant and small, as if looking up from far below. The features weren't clear, but I saw the shape of eyes, wide and unblinking, a mouth faintly open. It wasn't me. I stumbled back, the weeds catching at my shoes, nearly tripping me onto the pavement. The cover lay crooked where I'd shoved it aside, the dark gaping wider. My chest heaved, the air refusing to fill my lungs. I forced myself to shove the cover back into place and stepped quickly away, not daring to run but unable to slow my pace until I was 3 blocks from the lot. Sleep didn't come that night. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw that pale oval, floating in the dark. Not rising, not falling, just fixed, watching. By morning I told myself it was exhaustion, my eyes playing tricks in the dark, but I couldn't shake the certainty that I had seen someone, that the well had shown me something that wasn't mine to see. The town felt sharper in the daylight, its silence edged with something close to hostility. At the diner, a man I didn't know turned in his booth to look at me. He didn't blink until I dropped my gaze. At the grocery store, the cashier pushed my bag across the counter with both hands, her lips pressed so tight they'd gone white. No one spoke to me now, not a word. I lasted through the day, but by evening I was walking again, drawn down the same stretch of street. The weeds seemed taller, the cover darker. My hand shook as I pulled it aside. The stone ring stared up, unchanged. I leaned over, gripping the edge so tight my knuckles ached. The black water waited, unmoving. Then it shifted. The pale oval surfaced again, clearer this time, eyes fixed on me. The faint outline of a nose, a mouth parted as though it had been about to speak but never did. It wasn't my face. It wasn't anyone I recognized. I couldn't look away. My chest tightened, my breath shallow. The silence deepened, pressing against my ears until the faint rush of my pulse filled my head. The face didn't move. It didn't blink. It just stared. The sound of footsteps reached me again, faint and measured, approaching from behind. My grip on the stones tightened. I couldn't turn, couldn't break my gaze from the pale shape in the water. The steps drew closer. The face below widened, the mouth stretching a fraction. Not a smile, not a word, just an opening, a space that promised sound but never gave it. The footsteps stopped. The air behind me shifted cold, pressing close against my back. My lungs seized. I shut my eyes and pulled the cover hard across the well, the scrape loud in the silence. When I opened them again, the lot was empty. The weeds bent in the still air. The street stretched quiet and deserted. I didn't wait. I walked fast, my hands jammed into my pockets, my pulse hammering until my vision blurred. At home, the curtains rattled faintly in a draft. I pulled them shut, but the sensation of eyes pressing through the fabric lingered. I turned on every light in the house, but the shadows in the corners felt deeper, thicker. That night, I woke to the sound of dripping water, steady, slow from somewhere inside the house. I rose from bed, the boards creaking under my feet. The sound grew sharper as I moved toward the bathroom, but when I opened the door, the sink was dry, the tub empty. The sound came from the kitchen. I stepped into the doorway and froze. On the counter sat a drinking glass, half full of water. Its surface rippled faintly, though no one had touched it. I stared at it until my throat tightened. The drip continued, steady and slow, though no faucet was running. The pale oval pressed itself into my mind's eye again, the wide, unblinking stare. The mouth parted, I didn't touch the glass. I went back to bed, but the sound followed me through the night. By morning, the glass was empty. I couldn't stop thinking about the glass. By the time I dragged myself out of bed, the counter was bone dry. No trace of water, no glass at all. I hadn't touched it, I was sure of that. Yet it was gone as though it had never been there. At work, the numbers blurred in front of me. Papers slid across my desk, signatures scrawled where they needed to go, but none of it registered. All I saw was the ripple in that glass, the faint widening of a mouth in the dark water below. The town pressed back harder now. People didn't just avoid speaking to me, they avoided looking. In the diner, the same man sat in the booth near the window, his plate untouched, his eyes fixed on the street instead of me. The waitress placed my cup of coffee without glancing down, her lips pressed shut, her hand drawn back as quickly as if the steam had burned her. When I left, the bell above the door didn't chime. It should have. It always did. The streets were thinner in the afternoons, the sidewalks stretching longer, emptier. Windows reflected blank and flat. The air itself seemed to thicken, as if every step cost more effort than the one before. By evening, I was walking again, my feet carrying me without thought. The lot waited, patient as always. The weeds swayed faintly, though there was no breeze. The cover slid aside easier than it should have, as if the wood had grown lighter. I leaned over, and there it was again, the water, dark and steady, and the face, closer now, clearer. The eyes were fixed on me, the skin pale, features blurred but human. The mouth still parted, waiting. I gripped the edge so hard I thought my fingers might snap. My breath came in shallow bursts. "Who are you?" I whispered. The sound dropped into the well and vanished, swallowed whole. The face didn't move. I waited. My chest burned from holding breath, but I couldn't step back. My own reflection never appeared. Only that face, watching. The footsteps came again, slower this time, deliberate. The rhythm crawled up my spine like a hand. I didn't move. I couldn't. The face below widened its eyes. A flicker of something passed through its features, too faint to name, but it looked almost like recognition. The steps stopped. The silence returned, thicker than before. I jerked back, nearly losing my balance, and shoved the cover over the well. The wood scraped against stone with a sound like teeth grinding. When I turned, the lot was empty, but when I got home, the sound of dripping greeted me again, louder. This time, it wasn't just one glass. On the counter sat 3, all filled to the brim with clear water. Their surfaces rippled faintly, disturbed by something unseen. I didn't touch them. All night, I lay awake in the next room, listening to the faint drip of water hitting water. Each sound sharp, distinct, as though marked by intention. By morning, the glasses were empty, the counter was dry, but the air in the kitchen smelled faintly of damp stone. I left without eating. The silence outside pressed even harder. The streets stretched thinner, the buildings farther apart than they had any right to be. A woman crossed to the other side of the road when she saw me. Her steps quickened, her shoulders bent forward. In the store, the shelves seemed taller. Shadows clung to the corners, darker than they should have been. The cashier didn't even touch the bag this time. She slid it across the counter with her fingertips barely grazing the plastic. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. When I leaned closer, straining to hear, she stepped back so sharply her chair toppled. I didn't go back there again. The lot waited. It always did. The weeds had grown taller overnight. They bent toward the center as if reaching for the cover. The wood looked darker, damp. I pulled it aside with trembling hands. The water was there, so was the face, closer still, the eyes wide, unblinking, the mouth stretched open wider, too wide, as though a word might finally emerge, but no sound came. My knees bent without thought. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the air above the dark. My fingers brushed the edge, cold and slick. The face twitched, just once. A shiver, like something trying to push against the surface but unable to break through. A whisper stirred the air behind me. Not words, just the bare shape of sound, low and rough. I froze. The face below widened its mouth further, and the faintest ripple shuddered across the water. I stumbled back, dragging the cover across with both hands. The wood thudded into place. The whisper cut off. The silence returned, but it felt heavier. At home, I found 5 glasses waiting on the counter, filled, rippling faintly. I smashed them all against the floor. The sound of shattering glass rang too sharp in the small space. Water soaked into the cracks between tiles, glistening. When I staggered back, chest heaving, I saw them again. On the counter, whole, untouched, still full. I didn't sleep that night. Every shadow in the house seemed too deep, every corner too heavy. My ears strained for the sound of dripping, but it never came. Only silence. And in that silence, the faint echo of footsteps. Not behind me, not outside. Above, somewhere over the ceiling, slow, deliberate, crossing the length of the house, back and forth. I pressed my palms hard against my ears, but the sound carried through my bones. Each step measured, steady, tracing the space directly above where I lay. When dawn came, I found damp footprints on the ceiling. The footprints didn't fade. When I blinked against the light, they were still there. Dark, wet ovals pressed into the plaster overhead, spaced just like the slow-pacing steps I'd heard through the night. The ceiling sagged faintly where the prints curved, as if the weight above hadn't fully gone. I stood on a chair, neck craned, and reached up. My fingertips came back damp. No smell of mildew, no dirt, just clean water. I didn't stay long enough to check the rest of the house. My chest tightened every time I glanced up, expecting the prints to shift, to crawl across the ceiling while I watched. The kitchen was worse. The glasses had multiplied again. 12 now, every inch of the counter lined with them, brimming, each surface trembling faintly. When I stepped too close, the water inside rippled as though stirred by breath. I backed out and left without eating. The streets felt longer that day. The town stretched thinner. Shops I'd known seemed farther apart, and the air between them pressed too still, too thick. People didn't just avoid me anymore. They flinched when I passed, as if the damp clung to me, carrying something they could feel even without looking. By afternoon, I couldn't focus. My hands shook when I tried to write. My eyes dragged constantly to the window, where the glass pane reflected the street, but never me. Just the faintest ripple, like water. I didn't stay. The lot was waiting. The weeds bent farther inward, like 12 thin arms reaching for the cover. The wood had darkened further, swollen with damp, and when I pressed my hands to it, the cold bled through my skin. It slid open more easily than it should have, scraping with a hollow echo. The water stared back. The face was almost clear now. A pale oval with sunken eyes, wide mouth, skin stretched too tight. The features blurred and reformed like something trying to steady itself against the surface. The mouth moved. No sound reached me. I leaned closer, straining. It moved again. The lips shaped something faint, a curve I almost recognized, but the water swallowed it before it could surface. A ripple spread outward, slow and deliberate. Then the footsteps, not behind me this time, beside me. The weeds parted with each step, bowing flat as though pressed by weight, but the air was empty. I shoved the cover back in place and stumbled from the lot, my breath tearing in my chest. At home, the glasses weren't just in the kitchen anymore. They lined the coffee table, the floor near the couch, the narrow ledge of the hallway, always full, always rippling faintly. I couldn't move without nearly knocking one over. When I did, when my hip brushed a glass in the hall, the water didn't spill. The glass tilted, steadied, and righted itself. The surface rippled once, then stilled. I pressed my back to the wall, trembling. My throat felt raw, dry, though every corner of the house glistened with water. That night, the footsteps returned. Not on the ceiling this time. In the hallway. The sound of measured weight on the wooden floor, slow and steady, moving past the door, pausing, then returning. Back and forth. When I pressed my palms against my ears, the sound grew louder. Not in my ears, inside me, in the hollow of my ribs, the marrow of my bones. I lay frozen, counting each pass. Sometime before dawn, they stopped. When I opened the bedroom door, the hallway was damp. Every glass brimmed with water, and in the center of the floor, a trail of wet footprints stretched toward the kitchen. I followed them. My body moved against every protest my mind screamed. They led to the counter, to a single glass, filled higher than the rim, surface trembling. When I leaned closer, a ripple spread across it, forming the faintest shape of lips. The same lips I had seen below the well, the same wide mouth waiting. The glass shook in place, rattling against the counter, though no hand touched it. Then, with a sound like a breath escaping, the water spilled over. Not down the sides, not onto the counter, outward, across the air suspended, forming a thin line that reached toward me. I stumbled back, heart lurching, and the line snapped, droplets scattering across the floor. The glass was full again. I didn't touch it. By morning, the trail of footprints had dried, leaving only faint stains in the wood. The glasses remained, silent and full. I didn't go to work. I couldn't. The thought of facing the town, of walking those stretched thin streets under all those averted eyes, broke something inside me. Instead, I sat in the kitchen, surrounded, watching the faint ripples stir across every glass. Every so often, one of them shivered harder, as though something pressed just beneath its surface. Once I swore I saw an eye. I woke to dripping, not the steady, polite kind you get from a leaky faucet. This was heavier, uneven, fat drops striking hardwood. I rose without thinking, the way a body moves in a dream. The hallway sagged with damp, patches of the plaster bowed inward, water swelling through like bruises on skin. Drip, drip, drip. Each sound came from a different place, corners of the ceiling, the seam of the wall, even from beneath the floorboards. The glasses were everywhere now. I couldn't count them if I tried. They lined the hallway floor in two perfect rows, brimming. Some sat perched on the steps leading down to the living room, others balanced along the window sills. None had been there when I had gone to bed. And yet, none had spilled. Even the ones balanced precariously on the tilted floorboard sat perfectly still, full to the rim, trembling only faintly, as though responding to a breath. I stepped carefully between them. My shoulders brushed the walls. They were slick and cool, as though I'd wandered underground. In the kitchen, the table was gone, replaced by a perfect square of water, a hole. No, deeper than a hole. The floor itself had given way to the well, the same black circle of stone, rim dark with moisture, surface gleaming faintly in the dim light. The glasses around it leaned inward, like worshippers at an altar. I froze. My stomach knotted, throat raw. The face surfaced again, clearer this time, skin pale and stretched, hair floating in strands that clung to the rippling water. Eyes wide, unblinking, mouth moving with slow intent. I could see the words now. Drink. I stumbled back, nearly kicking a glass over. My heels struck the baseboard, my head snapping left and right, searching for any escape. But the kitchen door wasn't there anymore. The archway that should have led into the living room was bricked over, mortar still wet. The window above the sink showed no daylight, no town, no street, just the stone walls of the well, curving endlessly downward into black. The house had folded itself into the hole, or the hole had spread into the house. I don't know which. The face rose higher, just below the surface. Its lips brushed against the shimmer of water as it repeated the word, drink. The sound reached me this time, not through the air but inside my bones, a vibration that shook loose in the marrow, crawling up the column of my spine. My teeth ached with it. I pressed my palms against my ears, but that did nothing. The word lived in me now, rattling from within. The glasses trembled in unison. Ripples spread across every surface, converging and breaking like overlapping whispers. I backed toward the hallway. The ceiling bowed. Water bulged from the plaster, and then it burst, pouring down in a steady stream, filling the floorboards with rushing sound. The glasses did not move. Not a single drop spilled from them. The water flooded ankle-deep in seconds. I waded back, heart hammering. The house groaned. Every joint of wood, every seam of plaster strained like bones pulled too far apart. Another voice joined the first, not the face. Above me, footsteps, not pacing this time, descending. Slow, deliberate weight pressing one step at a time onto the attic ladder. The wood creaked, bending under something heavier than any person should be. The water surged higher. Knee-deep now, the glasses floated but upright. Not a single one tipped or emptied. They drifted gently across the surface, keeping their perfect brims. I pressed myself against the wall, shaking. The plaster was soft, sponge wet, and when I leaned too hard, it gave. My shoulders sank into it. Cold stone met my skin. I jerked back, but the wall wasn't plaster anymore. It was slick, uneven stone. The inner wall of the well, curved and damp, stretching both upward and downward beyond sight. The house was gone. Everywhere I turned, stone, water, glasses bobbing on the surface like offerings. The face rose higher, breaking the surface. Its mouth opened wider, water sluicing from its lips. The word grew louder, rolling like a command carved into the air. Drink. The footsteps were closer now, directly behind me. I didn't turn. I couldn't. I fixed my eyes on the face, on its pale, unblinking eyes, on the way its skin bulged around the edges like something pressed too hard against the surface. The glasses drifted closer, circling me. One bumped my leg. The water inside it rippled, and then a tongue broke the surface. Pale, slick, pressing against the rim before vanishing back inside. I kicked it away. My body trembled, every muscle burning with terror, but the circle of glasses closed in again. The face mouthed the word one last time. Its lips spread wide, teeth faintly visible through the water. The footsteps stopped, directly behind me. The air pressed tight, thick, as if someone's breath leaned inches from my neck. The glasses trembled violently now, ripples breaking into waves. And then the water rose, not from below, from above. A sheet poured down across the stone walls, burying everything in liquid weight. I gasped once before it swallowed me whole. The water pressed in on every side. It wasn't like drowning in a pool or river. There was no panic flail, no thrash toward the surface. There was only pressure, immense, crushing, alive. It folded around my chest and spine, pressing me downward with intent. I opened my eyes, though I don't remember choosing to. The water wasn't dark anymore. It pulsed with faint, milky light, as if lit from inside by veins of phosphorescence. The glasses drifted here too. Hundreds, thousands, suspended mid-water, brimming perfectly, their rims reflecting the pale glow. Each one faced me, not tilted, not spinning, facing me. Inside them floated fragments, hair, nails, bits of teeth, faces. They were pressed into the water as if into glass, lips against the surface, eyes straining wide, skin pale and stretched by the liquid's weight. Some mouthed words, but no sound reached me. The face from before was gone, or maybe it had never been singular. Maybe it was all of them. Something brushed my ankle. I looked down. The steps of the well spiraled beneath me, just as they had above. Each stone slick, worn smooth, leading deeper. But I wasn't standing. I was being drawn, slow and steady, downward into the spiral. The water guided me, handless but firm. As I passed the first ring of steps, shapes moved in the alcoves between them. People. No, not people anymore. They were seated in niches carved into the stone, their skin damp and pale, their mouths fixed open around brimming glasses. Their eyes followed me, unblinking, glowing faintly with the same milky light that filled the water. One raised a hand as I drifted by, fingers twitching as if to beckon. But the rest sat perfectly still, lips sealed to the rims of their glasses, their cheeks hollowed with each pull, as though drawing something out. I tried to push upward, but the water resisted. My arms barely moved. The pressure pinned me like an insect in resin. The spiral continued, step after step, niche after niche, more seated figures, more hollow faces sealed to glasses. The water vibrated. A sound moved through it, low groaning, the kind you feel in the ribs rather than hear. The glasses trembled in response, ripples spreading across their surfaces. The seated figures drank deeper. Their throats worked in unison. The pressure in my chest built until I thought my ribs would break. My vision swam with spots. Something inside me wanted to give in, to open my mouth, to let the water in. I clenched my jaw so tight it ached. My lungs screamed, every nerve on fire. The spiral led me lower. The seated figures ended. The alcoves gave way to carvings, etched faces in the stone, mouths gaping open. Water poured continuously from them, streaming into glasses balanced along the steps. Each carving resembled the face from before, wide-eyed, hollow, lips poised in the same wordless command. Drink. The current tugged harder. My body spun, dragged toward the center of the spiral. Below, the steps opened into a wider chamber. I saw it before I reached it, a platform of stone, encircled by glasses, each filled with the same pale light. And at the center, something waiting, not seated, not carved, not floating, waiting. Its body was vast, pale skin stretched thin over endless joints, limbs folding in directions no skeleton should bend. Its head was a swollen oval, eyes sunken, mouth stretched wide across its jawless face. The glasses around it pulsed faintly with every twitch of its throat. It looked at me, not with surprise, not even with hunger, with recognition. The water shivered. The glasses around me tipped as one. Liquid poured from their rims, not into the water but into me. My throat burned with it, my stomach clenched, my chest cracked with pressure. I hadn't opened my mouth, I hadn't swallowed, but I was filling. My lungs flooded. The figure at the center moved for the first time, its limbs unfolded, joints cracking like breaking branches. Its body uncoiled slowly, impossibly long, pressing against the stone walls of the chamber. It reached toward me. The water closed tighter, pressing my arms to my sides. My jaw ached. My head screamed for air. And then the command returned, stronger than ever, carving itself into every nerve, every bone, every drop of blood. Drink. I opened my mouth. The water rushed in, hot, metallic, tasting not of stone or soil but of marrow. It filled me in an instant. My chest burst with fire. My throat tore raw. My belly swelled tight. The figure's hand closed around my skull. Not crushing, not violent, guiding. It tilted me downward, toward a glass set neatly on the stone platform. The liquid inside glowed faintly. My reflection looked back from its surface, but not as I knew myself, hollow-eyed, mouth stretched wide, lips already mouthing the word, drink. The figure pressed me closer. My lips brushed the surface. The glass was impossibly deep, surface tension trembling with anticipation. The reflection's mouth opened wider, teeth sinking into the shimmer of water. The liquid breached. It poured into me, into my lungs, into my stomach, into the hollow spaces of my bones. The pressure broke something inside, and everything went still. The water didn't feel like water anymore. It felt thicker, heavier. Each breath I drew through my ruined throat brought more of it inside, but instead of drowning me, it seemed to hollow me out, replacing what I was. My chest no longer burned. My lungs no longer screamed. The fire had gone quiet. The hand on my skull released. The figure receded a step, its limbs bending and curling back against the stone. Its wide, jawless mouth stayed open, a black gash framed by faintly trembling lips. I tried to pull away from the glass, but my reflection didn't follow. It clung to the surface like a stain. Its hollow eyes moved with mine, but slower, lagging, deliberate. It mouthed the word again, "Drink." The command had no sound, yet it reverberated in my bones. I could feel the glasses lining the platform vibrating, faint rings pulsing across their surfaces. The seated figures above must have felt it too, their pale throats working as they drew from their endless vessels. The figure in the center leaned closer. Its body groaned like wood under strain, its skin translucent in places where the light shone through. Beneath it I could see movement, threads, veins, rivers of liquid running from the platform into its flesh. It wasn't simply surrounded by the glasses, it was fed by them. Each vessel poured into it, every brimming surface tied by unseen veins of light that converged into its swollen form. And now, I realized, so was I. The glass before me trembled in rhythm with my chest. The reflection pressed closer to the surface, its mouth wider now, teeth shining faintly with the pale glow. My own jaw ached as if pulled to match it. I raised my hands to the glass, trying to push it away, but my palms met nothing. They slid through air, through water, through surface. The glass was inside me. I stumbled back, but the water held me still. My legs kicked weakly against the spiral stone. The entity's head tilted with a crack of bone, its wide eyes unblinking, its mouth fixed in patient demand. I could feel it waiting. The pressure in my chest grew unbearable. My throat spasmed. The water in me wanted out, wanted release, but not as vomit, not as air. It wanted to pass forward, into the glass. My jaw stretched wider, wider than it should. The reflection's mouth split open like a wound, tongue lolling black against glowing teeth. I screamed, but the sound was just bubbles. The reflection screamed too, soundless, but where my throat tore with pain, its mouth spilled light. The glasses around the platform shook. Some tipped, none spilled. The liquid inside clung to its rims as though gravity had no claim. The seated figures above shuddered in unison. The spiral of the well groaned. And then the figure moved. It extended one arm, long, jointed in too many places, and pointed, not at the glass before me, not at the reflection, at the steps behind me, at the spiral leading upward. The command pressed against me again, heavier than the water, heavier than bone. Not drink this time. Go. I didn't move at first. Couldn't. The water still held me, its current pressing me toward the platform. The reflection clawed against the inside of the glass, its eyes blazing, its mouth opening wider with every second. But the entity's command was stronger. The water shifted. It pulled me upward. The spiral stairs blurred past, niches flashing with the pale faces of the seated figures. Their eyes followed me, but none reached this time. Their mouths stayed sealed to their glasses, throats still working, endless, higher and higher. The pressure in my chest didn't lessen. My lungs remained full, my throat still burned, but the water carried me regardless, indifferent to my body. The light dimmed. The glasses grew fewer, the alcoves emptied. Stone gave way to soil, soil to darkness, darkness to the faint shimmer of night sky above. And then I broke the surface. The well's rim was just as I had left it, moss slick, stone damp, the air sharp and cold against my face. I collapsed forward, coughing up stream after stream of clear liquid onto the earth. It pooled at my knees, soaking into the dirt with faint pulses of light before fading. I heaved until my stomach was raw, but nothing more came. My lungs still sloshed with liquid, every breath thick, heavy, but it no longer fought to escape. The surface water in the well lay still, no ripple, no light, no reflection, only black depth. I staggered to my feet. The night was silent, no crickets, no wind. just the sound of my shoes dragging across the grass. My body ached as if I had been crushed and rebuilt. My jaw still hung looser than it should, the muscles strained, the bones clicking when I closed it. But I was out. I turned from the well. My legs carried me toward the tree line, each step heavier than the last, and behind me, from the darkness of the water, I felt eyes follow. Not reaching, not pulling, waiting, because I hadn't emptied the glass, because the reflection was still there, and sooner or later it would need me to finish.